There are nights in professional baseball when the game ends and something else begins. Not the post-game analysis. Not the press conferences and the statistics and the measured professional commentary that follows every major league game regardless of what happened on the field. Something rawer than that. Something that moves faster and cuts deeper and refuses to be contained by the structures that professional sports organizations use to manage the moments that fall outside the boundaries of acceptable competition. Dodger Stadium has witnessed extraordinary things across its history. Moments that became permanent in the memory of the sport. Performances that redefined what was possible. Confrontations that tested the limits of competitive intensity and revealed, in the pressure of those tests, something true about the people involved. What happened after the ninth inning on this particular night belongs in a different category entirely. By the time the stadium lights were still fully illuminated, by the time most of the crowd had not yet reached the parking lot, something had occurred in the space between the field and the clubhouse that would not stay inside that space. That could not stay inside that space. That had already, before anyone with organizational authority had fully processed what had happened, begun traveling outward in the way that only the most significant moments travel. Fast. Unstoppable. Growing larger with each retelling rather than smaller. A Cubs star had crossed a line. Not the competitive line that gets crossed and recrossed in the normal course of a sport built on physical intensity and emotional investment. Not the line that produces warnings and ejections and the standard disciplinary vocabulary of professional baseball. A different line. A more serious line. The kind that does not get resolved on the field or in the dugout or in the post-game conversation between managers and umpires. The kind that produces an official complaint. Shohei Ohtani filed one. And when the most recognizable player in professional baseball files an official complaint against a specific individual from an opposing roster, the entire infrastructure of the sport is required to respond. Not informally. Not through the back channels that organizations sometimes use to manage sensitive situations away from public visibility. Officially. On the record. With consequences attached. So what exactly happened in those minutes after the ninth inning ended? What did the Cubs star do that pushed the situation past the point of informal resolution? And what does Ohtani's decision to file an official complaint reveal about the severity of what occurred and the character of the man who experienced it? To understand the chaos, you first have to understand the tension that had been building long before the ninth inning began. Nothing about the game itself was ordinary. From the first inning, the specific energy between these two teams carried an edge that experienced observers noticed and commented on in real time. Not the standard competitive intensity of two professional rosters trying to win a baseball game. Something more personal. More pointed. The kind of edge that forms when prior history between specific individuals on opposing rosters creates a current beneath the surface of the official competition. The Cubs had come into Dodger Stadium carrying something. The specific nature of that something had been visible in the pre-game preparation. In the particular focus that certain players were bringing to their warm-up routines. In the conversations that stopped when certain topics were approached and resumed when those topics were left behind. Something had preceded this game. Something that the people directly involved understood clearly and that the people observing from outside were only partially aware of. Ohtani had been the center of that something. Not through any action he had taken. Not through any statement he had made publicly or any gesture directed at any specific individual on the Cubs roster. But simply by being what he is. The gravitational center of a sport's attention. The player around whom every game involving his team is organized narratively, whether the people playing in it intend that organization or not. For certain players on the Cubs roster, that centrality had become, over the course of a season in which Ohtani's performance had consistently elevated the expectations placed on everyone around him, something that generated friction. The friction had been invisible through 7 innings. It became visible in the 8th. A play at the plate. A collision that fell inside the technical boundaries of legal baseball contact but existed at the extreme edge of those boundaries. A look exchanged afterward between the Cubs player involved and Ohtani that communicated, without any words, that what had just happened was not purely competitive in its intention. The benches were warned. The game continued. And the tension, rather than releasing through the warning and the official acknowledgement of its existence, compressed further. Stored itself in the remaining innings like pressure behind a barrier that everyone present could feel but nobody could see. The ninth inning ended. And the barrier broke. The specific sequence of events in the minutes following the final out has been reconstructed from multiple witness accounts, some given formally as part of the official complaint process and some shared informally with people outside the immediate situation. The picture that emerges is consistent across sources in its essential details, even where individual accounts differ in their description of specific moments. The Cubs player approached Ohtani in the corridor that connects the field to the clubhouse areas. Not the open field where cameras cover every angle and organizational staff are positioned to intervene in the first visible sign of escalating tension. The corridor. A space with more limited visibility and fewer immediate witnesses than the field itself. The approach was not the casual, post-competition interaction that sometimes occurs between players from opposing teams in the shared spaces of a stadium at the end of a game. The body language was not casual. The direction of movement was too deliberate. The positioning too specifically aimed at a particular destination. Ohtani, aware of the approach, turned to face it directly. Words were exchanged. The specific content of those words is part of the official record now and has not been released publicly in full detail. But the witnesses who heard them have described the tone, and the tone alone communicates the severity of what was being said. And then the Cubs player made contact. Not the incidental contact of a crowded space. Not the ambiguous contact that can be interpreted as either deliberate or accidental depending on the perspective of the observer. Deliberate contact. Intentional. Directed. The kind that, outside the specific context of professional athletics, has a clear legal definition. Ohtani did not respond in kind. This detail has been confirmed by every witness account and is considered one of the most significant elements of the entire episode by the people responsible for processing the official complaint. He absorbed what happened. Maintained his composure in a way that multiple witnesses described as extraordinary given the circumstances. And made a decision, in the seconds that followed, about how he was going to respond. Not with escalation. Not with the physical retaliation that the situation might have justified in the minds of many people who heard about it afterward. With a phone call to his representation. And a formal complaint filed through the official channels of the league. In professional baseball, the filing of an official complaint is not a casual act. It initiates a process with specific procedural requirements and specific consequences for everyone involved. It requires documentation. Witness statements. A formal account of the incident from the filing party that becomes part of the permanent record. It requires the league office to respond within defined time frames and to apply standards that exist independent of the organizational preferences of the teams involved. It is the mechanism that the sport has created for situations that cannot be resolved within the normal competitive boundaries of the game itself. When Ohtani filed his complaint, he activated all of that. The Cubs organization was notified through official channels before the end of the evening. The player involved was informed of the complaint and of the process it had initiated. Legal representatives on both sides were contacted. The league office began the intake process that transforms a hallway incident into an official matter of record. None of this happens quietly. The Cubs organization, to their credit in the assessment of several observers close to the situation, did not attempt to minimize or deflect. Their initial response acknowledged the seriousness of the situation and committed to full cooperation with the official process. That response communicates something important about how the organization assesses the severity of what their player did. Organizations that believe their players' behavior was defensible respond differently than organizations that recognize immediately that it was not. The Cubs recognized it was not. The player involved was placed on a kind of informal organizational hold while the process developed. Removed from the normal routine of preparation and media access that professional players maintain even during controversy. Kept in a space of institutional uncertainty while the official machinery processed what had been filed against him. The weight of that uncertainty is something that everyone who has ever been subjected to it describes in similar terms. It is not comfortable. It is not designed to be. Dodger Stadium going into chaos after a ninth inning is not a scenario that the Dodgers organization has a standard protocol for. They have protocols for many things. For media management during difficult stretches of performance. For injury announcements and roster moves and the complex communication requirements of a large organization operating under constant public scrutiny. For the normal range of controversies that arise in the course of a professional baseball season. This was not within the normal range. The organizational response in the immediate aftermath was focused on two priorities that sometimes pull in different directions but in this case aligned clearly. The first priority was Ohtani. His well-being. His assessment of his own physical and emotional state following what had happened. His comfort with the process he had initiated and his understanding of what that process would involve in the hours and days ahead. People close to Ohtani in the organization described his demeanor in the aftermath as composed in a way that surprised them. Not the performed composure of a person suppressing a reaction they do not want to display. The genuine composure of a person who has processed what happened, made a clear decision about how to respond, and is now simply executing that decision without the emotional turbulence that might accompany it for most people. He was calm. Specific. Clear about what he had experienced and what he wanted the official response to it to be. The second priority was the integrity of the situation. The Dodgers had a responsibility to their own organization, to the league, and to the official process that had been initiated, to ensure that everything they knew and everything their staff had witnessed was made available to the people responsible for processing the complaint. They fulfilled that responsibility completely. Professional athletes operate within an accountability structure that is, in some ways, more demanding than the accountability structures most people navigate in their working lives. Their behavior is observed constantly. Their interactions are witnessed by colleagues, organizational staff, media personnel, and the public in proportions that most professions never experience. The consequences of crossing certain lines are not theoretical or distant. They are immediate and highly visible and professionally costly in ways that cannot be mitigated by personal relationships or organizational loyalty. The Cubs player who made contact with Ohtani in that corridor did so with full awareness of all of this. Not that awareness always prevents behavior. It does not. The accumulation of tension across 9 innings, the specific personal history that had made this game carry more weight than an ordinary regular season contest, the moment of decision in a corridor with fewer witnesses than the open field, all of these factors create conditions in which even experienced professionals sometimes act in ways that their calmer selves would not choose. But the awareness was there. And the choice was made anyway. What follows from that choice is now in the hands of the official process. The Cubs player, through representation, has declined to characterize what happened publicly while the process is ongoing. This is the standard legal posture and reveals nothing specific about how the situation will ultimately be resolved. But the absence of a public defense of the behavior, the lack of any framing of the contact as unintentional or misinterpreted, is itself communicative to people experienced in reading these situations. The organizational silence on the specifics of what happened is the sound of an organization that knows its player did something that cannot be defended as acceptable. Strip away the chaos. Remove the official complaint and the organizational responses and the league process and the media coverage that has surrounded this episode since the moment it became public. What remains, at the center of everything, is a choice. The choice Ohtani made in the seconds after contact was made. In the corridor, with limited witnesses and no cameras and no organizational staff positioned to manage the moment. In the privacy of a situation that was as close to genuinely private as anything in Ohtani's public life ever gets. He chose not to respond physically. He chose to absorb what had happened. To remove himself from the immediate situation. To make contact with the people he trusted to help him navigate what came next. And to pursue accountability through the mechanisms that the sport has created for exactly these situations rather than through the immediate physical retaliation that the situation might have produced in a different person. This choice reveals something that his performance statistics, as extraordinary as they are, cannot capture. It reveals a person who understands that how you respond to the worst moments is the truest measure of who you are. Not the home runs. Not the strikeouts. Not the records and the awards and the historic achievements that define his public identity. The choice made in a corridor after the ninth inning, with no audience and no upside and no version of the outcome that feels like winning. That choice is who Shohei Ohtani actually is. And the baseball world, processing the chaos that has followed from it, is slowly arriving at the understanding that it already suspected. He is more than what the scoreboard shows. Dodger Stadium emptied slowly that night. The crowd that had come to watch a baseball game had witnessed something that no ticket purchase and no broadcast subscription and no pre-game analysis had prepared them for. Something that would occupy the baseball conversation for days and weeks in a way that even the most dramatic on-field moments rarely sustain. By the time the last cars left the parking structure, the official complaint was already filed. The process was already moving. The Cubs organization was already in communication with the league. And the player responsible for initiating all of it was already in whatever private space a person retreats to when they have made a choice that cannot be unmade. Ohtani, by multiple accounts, went home. Not to a celebratory environment. Not to any kind of performance of victimhood or righteousness or the public emotional display that a situation like this might have produced from a person less fundamentally grounded in their own sense of who they are. He went home. To the people who matter most to him. To the ordinary private life that he has always treated as more important than anything that happens in the public spaces where his professional life unfolds. He would prepare for the next game. He would arrive at the stadium having processed what had happened and filed it in whatever mental space he reserves for things that are important but not permitted to disrupt his focus on what he is there to do. Because that is what Ohtani does. Not because he is performing resilience. Not because the chaos doesn't reach him. But because the years of preparation and discipline and self-management that have made him the player he is have also made him the person he is. A person who responds to chaos with clarity. To aggression with composure. To a situation designed to destabilize with the quiet, unmistakable steadiness of someone who knows exactly who they are and exactly what they stand for. The Cubs star crossed a line in a corridor after the ninth inning. The complaint has been filed. The process is moving. The consequences will arrive through official channels in the measured time frames that official processes require. And Shohei Ohtani is already thinking about tomorrow. Because that is who he is. That has always been who he is. And no chaos, in any corridor, after any inning, is ever going to change that.